Hello, hello, one and all. Here we are again at the Whole Health Macrobiotic Forum. It's such a pleasure to see everyone and have such a good turnout, and especially to welcome our special guests, always special guests, and this time super special guests of Leonard, shall I call you Jacobs, being interviewed by Michael Rossoff. So, two of my favorite people, what could be bad? So I'm happy to get going. Okay.
Good. Hello, everyone. I'm Michael, and this is Lenny, in case you're wondering who's who. And uh, Lenny and I have known each other uh, since July 1969, and that's a long time. And we crossed paths in Boston in the same study house on Beacon Street. And from there, we've kept in touch all these years, even though I left Boston by 72, 73 to Washington, D.C. area, and Lenny stayed in Boston and did a lot there that we're going to talk about. But Lenny, so his experience was very different than mine, but we've always kept in touch, and our children know each other. It's just a very close compatibility we've had. Now Lenny lives here in beautiful Asheville, North Carolina, and you've been here 8 years?
10.
10. So Lenny's been here quite a while. Time just keeps on flying. So um, and it's even closer friendship now that we're living in the same town and fairly near each other. So it's really wonderful. Um, so last time Lenny interviewed me, and I get the pleasure of interviewing him today. So let me just say that Lenny is from Ohio, and he has a different kind of uh, center of the country, earthy presence. And with that, he is always um, connecting to people. I'd say there's one great strength that I've known of Lenny is his ability to connect with people, and more than that is remember people. He has a memory like I know no one else has. And so you're going to hear some interesting, wonderful stories of all the history that he's been involved in because he's been so much closer to the Boston experience of the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s. He's really been there through it all. And the rise and, what I say, the fall of macrobiotics. And so let me turn to Lenny now and um, ask you to introduce yourself in some ways that you think would uh, inform people of your experience and what you want to talk about today.
Thanks. Thanks, Michael. And as Michael said, we're now both residents of Asheville. And to some extent, Michael's responsible for my moving to Asheville. He introduced me to my now partner, Becky Cannon, while she was writing a book about everything you'd want to know about children and development of children. Uh, she was running a company in Asheville that sold and made children's products, and she was working on a book. And Michael knew of my experience for 20 years, having worked at Shambhala Publications, that I had some expertise and insights about publishing. And so we met, and I moved here, and we've been living together now for 10 years. And we're about a mile and a half down the road from where Michael lives. And Asheville, not only is a beautiful town, in the mountains of Western North Carolina, but it's been sort of a haven for many former or long-term macrobiotic people. Lino and Jane Stankich lived here, and Maggie Cottrell was living here. Anyhow, there were probably 15 or 20 or 30 macrobiotic people here, and there still are. So it's a great place to kind of maintain our practice while seeing how well it integrates with the rest of the world. And yes, I come from Ohio, and I come from uh, middle America, whether it's farm country. And when I grew up, there still were active farms. My grandparents were farmers. They were farmers in northern Ohio, and they were connected to the land. They were connected to the plants. They grew fruit, they grew vegetables, and they supported themselves as Jewish immigrants coming from Europe in the early 20th century. They developed their farm starting in the early 1920s. And as an infant, as a child, as a toddler, I spent a lot of time on that farm, and I was aware of the intimate and important connection that we have to our daily diet and to the growth and development of good quality food. And so when I encountered a life practice that was centered around food, not limited to our diet, but was focused on the principles of life that included the principles of how to eat, it resonated strongly. And it felt like I had found something that connected to my foundation and to my lineage. And although my grandparents on both sides probably didn't have a long lineage of farming, they did have a long lineage of growing their own food and of having local, seasonal, organic food as the staple part of their life and their diet. I I was in college in Chicago in the mid early 60s, and that's where I encountered macrobiotics for the first time. I was studying something at the University of Chicago called human development. And human development is a study of really human development. And the only thing missing at the time was religion or spirituality. Otherwise, it was the biology and the anthropology, sociology, psychology of a growing human and development, evolving human. It was a remarkable course of study that really integrated psychology, sociology, biology, and so forth. The graduate department was far more kind of intensive and deep in those areas of integration. But my graduate studies was in Boston. I left Chicago in 1969, having been a school teacher on the south side of Chicago, and I studied macrobiotics as the way of continuing my interest in the unfolding and development of whole human beings through our practice, our studies, philosophy, but really the practice of macrobiotics, the practice of a whole life, which I think is unique about what we have developed, what we have studied, what we have chosen as our life. It's not just a diet, it's not just a philosophy, it's not just a meditation practice, it's the whole life, the whole being, and the whole human development.
So Lenny, how did you end up in Boston? What were the factors or encounters that made that possible?
Yeah, interesting. I was a school teacher on the south side of Chicago and was very frustrated as I recognized the value of diet in anybody's well-being and certainly in a school where kids were eating the worst kind of junk food, that it was really frustrating to try to get their attention, let alone to give them a basis of uh, I don't know, whatever academics or the curriculum of study that included more than what was in the textbooks. And so I decided to drop out of the Chicago school system and find it was either San Francisco and Berkeley, where Herman Ihara had set up the Noodle Nook, or Boston, where Michio Kushi had set up Sinai and Erewhon and an active macrobiotic study center. And I chose the East Coast. I was more familiar with the East Coast than the West Coast, and decided to drop everything, got rid of my possessions, and I had one car that I had gotten when I graduated college and drove to Boston looking for sort of my Mecca, which I thought was not just my Mecca, but a Mecca, a kind of place of real deep understanding and study where it wasn't a place that could cure cancer. It was a place to liberate and integrate human beings, liberate from the kind of false guidelines that we had been indoctrinated with since childhood in America and North America, and given an opportunity to make free choices based on a deeper understanding of reality, of how nature interrelated and how humans integrated with the local, the general, and the infinite world. And it was an inspiring time. There really, at the time I moved here, when I met Michael, there were probably 4 or 5 what we called study houses, where there were lectures twice a week. There was macrobiotic food cooked and cooking classes every day. And twice a week, there were lectures, mainly by Michio Kushi, but there were occasional guests who came to a downtown center at a church, at a Unitarian church in downtown Boston. There was a Sinai restaurant where you could get a bowl of rice for 50 cents and it was all you could eat. It was unlimited refills, and hijiki and wakame and no artificial sweeteners. We fought over using maple syrup once a year in our cranberry sauce for Thanksgiving. Erewhon was a retail store up the street from Sinai, but it was a developing manufacturing and wholesale company. By 1975, and I would say that it wasn't the rise and fall of macrobiotics, but the expansion and contraction of
Okay.
macrobiotics that we experienced. But as it was expanding, there were probably 10 study houses. There were probably 2 or 3,000 actively studying, practicing, working people who identified with macrobiotics. It wasn't a fringe movement. It was like a revolutionary movement that we felt was not only going to liberate each of us, but it was going to provide a sustenance and a direction, a compass for humanity to really find a way out of confusion, chaos, conflict, out of the polarizing development at that time. So this was still Vietnam War was going on. Still, there were civil rights movements, even though the Civil Rights Bill had passed, there were still issues. And we found that we integrated with Asian people, Occidental people, African American people, Indian. I mean, everybody was involved. They felt like there was a humanness to what we were teaching and developing and studying, not a nationalism, not a racism, not a exclusivity, but a complete inclusive, embracive quality, which of course it challenged each of us because we were having to give up some of our strong attachments, whether it was to a religious practice, a dietary practice, a nationalist pride, and it was challenging, and it is challenging. But that was the kind of mecca that Boston provided, not only me, but like I said, thousands of people, and many of them, like Michael and like Becky and like many other people, came, got introduced, got some indoctrination, but then left because they didn't feel that indoctrination was liberating, it was confining. And so they wanted to expand and take those principles and apply them in the whole world outside of that kind of confines. However, got involved, and as did Michael. We were both cooking at the Sinai restaurant in 1971. In 1971, we opened up what we then called the Big Sinai, which eventually became the Seventh Inn, many of you know about. The Seventh Inn was like this kind of massive restaurant. We could seat 120 people, and the kitchen was on the second floor. And I and one other person who moved to Japan, another American, we became the head chefs at the Seventh Inn. It was a challenging time, and it was an exciting time. And ultimately, I left and I moved to Minneapolis, where at the University of Minnesota, I set up a macrobiotic kitchen a macrobiotic restaurant called the Whole Foods Cafe, and we served a couple hundred people a day. We just made breakfast and lunch. We weren't making dinner, but we were serving the student body, and there were really hundreds of people who were excited about and inspired by good quality whole grain macrobiotic kind of food. But we also had facilities there where we taught regularly, and we brought Micho to Minneapolis twice during the time when I was there. It was interesting too. Minneapolis, if those of you don't have never been, it can get to 20 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit. And I thought when we picked up Micho at the airport, he would love it. He's from Japan. He is hardy. He eats soba. He was so cold. I felt sorry. He said, "Would you keep turning up the heat for me? I don't like this cold weather." Anyhow, we adjusted, and it was inspiring, and quite a few of our students ended up moving to Boston, and eventually I did too. In 1974, I moved back to Boston and began working at East West Journal.
Right. So East West Journal, for those who may not know, was the macrobiotic magazine, a monthly magazine published with Lenny as the publisher, and some excellent writers writing for it. And it started to have a more national impact, affecting everyone around the country and outside of America. So it grew from a small size to what, 100,000?
Yeah, we had about 150,000 circulation when I left, when we sold the magazine. And Michael and I were also uh, associating through our shared experience in publishing. Michael was publishing a macrobiotic magazine called Macromuse. East West Journal started in 1971 at the same time when we opened up what became the Seventh Inn, a man who was studying in Boston who had had experience publishing actually a magazine for restaurant owners. Um, and he decided that he wanted to start a magazine that would reflect the development of the macrobiotic community, starting in Boston, but then eventually nationwide. And he gave it the name East West Journal. He then gave it over to Jack Garvey, who gave it over to Robert Hargrove. And Robert Hargrove and his then associates, including Eric Utney, who ultimately developed the Utney Reader, they left East West Journal to start the New Age Journal, which was much more kind of a broad development. And again, in the 70s, there we were, with Eastern, Indian gurus, as well as, human potential development. I mean, that was a est and actualizations, and so many really vibrant personal development movements that were spreading throughout the country. New Age Journal focused on that. And I took on the responsibility of publishing East West Journal, which was at that time owned by the Kushi family, like Erewhon, like the Seventh Inn, and was focused still, the principles were macrobiotics, but we wanted to really broaden it so that it wasn't just diet, but it included all interplays between Eastern and Western thought, Eastern and Western culture, Eastern and Western philosophies. We excerpted the first publication of the Book of Miso, Autumn Press. There were some macrobiotic students of Micho's who had been in Japan, and they started the book. They started the book publishing company that did the Book of Miso, the Book of Tofu, the Book of Tempeh, all of which we excerpted in the East West Journal. We introduced futons. One of our uh, one of our friends from Minneapolis who ended up moving to Boston, she started a futon company, and one of her customers through an ad in East West Journal was Donovan, the folk singer. He had a futon shipped to him where he was living in Ireland, and he couldn't get one in the UK. That was still kind of like a developing kind of industry and experience that is now becomes kind of second nature. Futons is as much American as it is Japanese, but we were promoting really a natural lifestyle. We were promoting a discovery and an interplay between the Western rational thinking and the Asian or Eastern kind of more intuitive, experiential way of living and thinking, and in particular, a natural approach to healing. And so we introduced acupuncture. Michael was one of the original macrobiotic students who studied acupuncture, but not the only one. And there were, you know, Nixon went to China in the 70s, and that's when they opened up trade with China. Hard to believe that we didn't have trade with China at some point, nor did we really know about the Yellow Emperor's Classic or needling and moxa. Micho had a few Japanese people come to teach about Chinese medicine and demonstrated moxa. At that time, moxa, this little mugwort-based herb, would go right on the skin, and with a little bit of incense, you'd burn it and it would go. And it said, Micho would say, unless you have scars from these main points, you're not serious about your self-healing. So we would all like, I'm gonna use a cigarette and burn myself. But it was exciting. And we were not necessarily afraid of, but we didn't need allopathic Western medicine. Although dentistry was one thing that we all felt we could benefit from. Chewing was important, so we needed to have strong teeth. At East West Journal, we introduced a lot of complements to Western medicine or Western allopathic medicine. And when we say Western medicine, we have to be aware that allopathic medicine is the one that we probably have the most resistance to because it seems to be invasive and disruptive to natural energy. But Western medicine includes homeopathy and naturopathy and naturopathy and chiropractics, all of which are forms of Western medicine that we embrace. And I think we also need to embrace the allopathic, which means treating with opposites. And after all, when we're yin, we treat it with a yang. When we're too yang, we treat it with a yin. So we are, as yin yang experts, we are also finding ways of balancing opposites rather than using similars, which is homeopathic. And I think embracing anthroposophic medicine, which is developed by Rudolf Steiner and his students, and homeopathy, Hahnemann and his teachings, I think all of these fit together. And one of the things that's a main point that's going on right now, and I know politically as well as socially, there's a concern about immunizations, vaccines, whether we're talking about measles or whether we're talking about COVID or whether we're talking about polio. And I wrote a series of articles in East West Journal about the dangers of immunization. And I feel a little bit ashamed or embarrassed that it sounded like the dangers of rather than to be aware of the alternatives to modern vaccines, modern immunizations. And there are many, many arguments that show how improved hygiene in areas, in cities, in the water supply, improved hygiene overall in our ability to have clean clothes, clean dishes, clean food, came at the same time as the reduction of infectious diseases, childhood illnesses, measles, mumps, rubella, polio, tetanus. These were all things that immunizations came out at the same time as the improvement of sanitation in people's homes and in the cities increased the water quality. And so it's hard to make the complete connection that vaccines were responsible for the extreme reduction in childhood illnesses. However, vaccines, as we know, has an impact. Is the negative impact stronger than the positive benefit? Everybody has to decide. And I feel bad that I made the argument that it does, that the detrimental effect of immunizations was greater than the potential benefit. What I mean to say is everybody has to choose. And if you don't use vaccines for your children or for yourself, you need to be responsible and learn how to treat the illnesses if they develop. And in fact, I have 5 children. They all developed measles. None of them had vaccines. My kids did not have vaccines. 2 of them had to get vaccinated when they went to private school at college. So when they were in their 18, 19-year-old period, they got vaccines in order to enter the college. But they did get measles. My daughter, my oldest daughter, when she was 11 or 12, was the first one in the family. She was exposed to somebody on a field trip, and they had high fever. They had red speckles on their bodies. They were really miserable. And was I a responsible or irresponsible parent in allowing them to develop this condition? Were they too yin? Well, in fact, there is a Chinese medicine, I don't know if it's in the classics or if it's just among folk medicine, that measles is part of the development maturation of a human being, and that measles are an essential part of a child growing up, but that you need to moderate the symptoms so that they don't get out of hand and get spinal meningitis or other complications from a high fever. And so learning about the ways of treating illness is the responsible response to not having vaccines. Vaccines may provide value, I don't think they use the levels of mercury as a preservative in vaccines any longer that may be associated with some other childhood illnesses. But I know that there was a macrobiotic family, at least one in Boston, whose 4-year-old child died from spinal meningitis, having had a high fever, and they refused to go to the doctor to treat the child, and the child died. And this was in the macrobiotic community, an active teacher in the Kushi Institute whose child died. Was that sacrifice worth learning? I mean, I don't know, but we do have our attachments to what's right and wrong about our practice. And I feel like I needed to temper my kind of diatribe, my evangelism about the dangers of modern vaccines. I'm not encouraging everybody to do it. I'm not encouraging anyone to do it. But if you don't, you might get COVID. You might get COVID even if you get vaccinated. What do you do when you get sick? That's one of the masteries that macrobiotic students, practitioners, I think, have developed, the understanding. Go to Michael or go to your local acupuncturist, get Chinese herbs, try homeopathy. There are a lot of things that you can do outside of modern medicine, modern allopathic medicine to treat those symptoms before they get so extreme that could cause fatality. Anyhow, it's East West Journal.
Yeah. So, but you were in Boston at the time when Erewhon was flourishing, East West Journal. Then they, in their separate ways, kind of fell apart. Do you want to share some of that, or do you think that's important for the community to
That's a good
know about that history?
It's a good question, and I wonder if in fact it's related to this issue of inflexibility that many of us had when we started macrobiotics, and maybe, there was a right diet and a wrong diet. There was a right way to do business and a wrong way to do business. And we were reluctant, like I said, to include and embrace homeopathy, naturopathy, chiropractics. We were reluctant to embrace other methods of managing businesses. So yeah, Tom Monty was the editor at East West Journal when Denny Waxman encountered Anthony Sadolero and helped him recover from terminal cancer. And Tom was selected to write the book. And the Recalled by Life book about Anthony Sadolero's recovery of cancer, Recalled by Life, that was excerpted in the then popular magazine Saturday Evening Post. Suddenly, macrobiotics, instead of it being what was once called the diet that's killing our kids, was the diet that's curing cancer. It was amazing. Micho was suddenly on a pedestal. Denny Waxman was even maybe a little higher. And then Tom Monty, who wrote the book and was interviewed along with Micho and Denny and Anthony Sadolero, suddenly this was, what do you think, 1978, 79?
No, early 80s.
1980, 81?
Yeah.
Suddenly like, whoa, macrobiotics is the mecca, not for personal discovery and human development, but to cure terminal illnesses. And Martha Cottrell then introduced it with Micho for AIDS. I guess it was, we didn't say it for Parkinson's. We didn't say it for ALS, but certainly cancer and AIDS. The secret was macrobiotics. And it was amazing. And it that's where East West Journal, the Kushi Institute, the macrobiotic centers all over the world. And we were writing about it in East West Journal, not exclusively, but we did cover all of these things. We covered about AIDS, we covered about cancer, we covered about heart disease. We had so many articles. And then we discovered that macrobiotic people had vitamin B12 deficiencies. Children had B12 deficiencies. Rickets was developing among the macrobiotic community in Boston. They hadn't seen rickets in Boston since the late 1800s. Vitamin D and dairy food fortified with vitamin D, everybody considered, a modern American was drinking that, and we had never seen rickets. And B12, you eat enough animal food or take vitamin pills. And so we discovered like our rigidity was developing, kind of hardness that was breaking. And that included Erewhon was this incredible business. It was, much potential that more than Whole Foods as it grew. Erewhon had, I think, 5 or 6 retail stores, including one in Los Angeles and one in Cambridge and 3 or 4 in the Boston area, plus a manufacturing company, plus a distribution company, an export company, and it went bankrupt. The Seventh Inn went bankrupt. Dow Books went bankrupt. Dow Books was a bookstore as well as a publishing company as well as a wholesale distribution company. Long before Amazon or ebooks, there was only a few places where you could get the kind of books that really were kind of the keys to the kingdom that we were encountering. What was going on? Why could we not, grow with the times? What was it that did not flex and adapt? I don't know. You were there too. You were teaching. What were we missing? East West Journal at that time, we sold it. We couldn't raise the money to maintain it, but we sold it before it went out of business. But it was potentially going to have to close. But we found a buyer who maintained it, at least the spirit, if not the principles of what it had been. It was renamed. We eventually changed the name East West, the Journal of Natural Health and Living. And when they bought it, they changed it to be called just Natural Health. And it continued for a number of years. But what was it that caused this great growth? And then, bam, it's contracted and it cracked.
So Micho owned those. So he must have played a part in how that outcome occurred. Is that true?
Well, I guess he ran the foundations because some of them were nonprofit foundations at the time. The Kushi Foundation, the East West Foundation, and East West Journal eventually became part of the Kushi Foundation. And so, yeah, the other ones were for-profit businesses owned by Micho. And how could our principles be so effective in curing cancer, but they couldn't be applied to growing a business and a successful business? What was missing? What is missing? What can we do? What could we do? What can we learn from what we didn't do? I mean, a couple of the things that, besides my awareness that the rigid, and I felt like a revolutionary. No more vaccines. We don't need them. Children are going to get sicker from the vaccines, and that's going to solve the problems. No, we can use them judiciously. We have judgment on how to use what is available in the whole world. It's not only this and not that, but it's this and that. How can we have a better, embracive whole synthesis rather than choosing yang over yin. It's yin and yang makes one. It's not two. And we understand that intellectually, but I feel that we fail to grasp that kind of in our real active life. And so, yes, vaccines can work. And maybe we can find there was a guy named Richard Moskowitz who was a MD homeopath in Boston who developed homeopathic vaccines.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't an injectable, it was a one you ate. There may have been an injectable, but it was not using the conventional vaccine formulations,
Right.
hypodermic. It was a homeopathic vaccine that was recognized by the medical establishment in the Boston area. So that if you needed a vaccine to go to school, that was one that worked. Another one was our choice of salt. We really felt like, I mean, and Americans probably always ate a lot of salt. Canned food probably had a lot of salt in it, but there was a developing movement in the West, in America, and in Europe to reduce our salt content because there was a potential for heart disease. But among macrobiotics, we're like, nope. And kind of we followed the Japanese tendency to more salt rather than less salt. And what we thought was whole was better than half. Unrefined is better than refined. And when we first lived in Boston, the only sea salt we could get was Chico-san sea salt that was evaporated seawater that was collected by the then Chico-san company in Oroville by, I think it was Bob Kennedy was running Chico-san, which made ultimately sold rice cakes. But they were importing food from Japan and they were making sea salt. And the packages we used to get at the natural food store had to have on it unfit for human consumption. It was mostly dehydrated, boiled seawater. It was still wet, so you had to roast it in a cast iron pan. And there were some black things that you kind of had to try to separate out. But it was heavy metals were part of the problem. We looked at Morton sea salt or Morton salt, which had iodine added, and it was 99.99% sodium chloride. So we said, oh, there's no trace minerals. We need those trace minerals. We want sea salt. And what we were consuming was heavy metals that caused all kinds of weird conditions.
Well, no one knew that at the time.
We didn't know that.
Okay, let's make that
But we
clear.
started getting skin discharges. And it was very strange conditions that people got. But it was just like one of these kind of rigid, this is wrong, this is right, we need to do it, even though the FDA has said this kind of food is not for humans. You can put it in, on your driveway for dissolving ice, but we shouldn't eat it. Now sea salt is contaminated with microplastics. Now sea salt, like water, has PFAS in it, one of those forever chemicals, and we don't know how it's contributing to our health or well-being or alternative. What else can we take for salt? Do we need as much salt? Are we actually overdoing salt or potassium? Is that sodium potassium balance in sync, in harmony? And can we adjust it as we get older or for infants? So there were these issues that we had. And the one thing that I wanted to mention that was another area of kind of disagreement or difficult conversation among longtime macrobiotic teachers were 100% unrefined whole grains is the ultimate food. And I told Michael about this a few weeks ago, but the first person introduced to me the idea that 100% whole grains may not be the ultimate diet was a man named Rudolph Ballantyne. Rudolph Ballantyne was an MD, is an MD, and he was a nutritionist and wrote the book Diet and Nutrition. He was involved with the Himalayan Institute in Pennsylvania, and they actually opened up East-West bookstores. It had nothing to do with the East-West Foundation, but it was India and the West and looking at diet, nutrition, and health from an East and West perspective. He told me when I interviewed him for East-West Journal that in India, it was very uncommon only at times of extreme famine or conflict did they eat 100% unrefined rice or wheat. Wheat was a much more common staple than rice in India, and they always partially sifted the ground wheat so that some of the bran, the outer hull where we feel we get the most fiber and nutrition, was eliminated. Otherwise, it was very difficult to digest whole wheat berries, whole wheat flour, whole wheat in any form. And I resisted his comment, and I began looking at it. Well, what about in China and Japan, where rice was a staple? What was their approach traditionally before modern technology intervened to eating whole, unrefined, unpolished grains? Well, first off, millet was much more common than rice for the common people in China and Japan. And rice came only for the more wealthy people. And the higher echelon people, they liked white, clean, refined rice. White rice, which you could polish with, again, low technology equipment, was what they ate more regularly. So, what about the macrobiotic teachings? One of George Osawa's contemporaries, Alkan Yamaguchi, who was also a very popular macrobiotic teacher in Japan when Osawa traveled, Alkan was one of the main teachers. His daughter was working for Eden Foods at the time, and she told me that what her father heard from Osawa and what he taught in Japan was 30% polished rice is ideal. That means 30% of the bran is removed. And so it's partially polished. But most people in the West and in North America and Europe can't find a rice polishing machine. So 100% is better, 100% unpolished is better than 100% polished. So that's where we said, okay, 100% brown rice. How does that affect our digestion? How many people, I know among the people on this forum, maybe every one of them eats nothing but 100% brown rice. But how many people started and couldn't continue because it was so hard to digest? It had a difficult time in their digestive system. So I checked with my Japanese friends, and every household in Japan just about has a rice polishing machine. It's about the size of a toaster. You put in 100% brown and you dial it up from 10% polished to 100% polished, depending on the application. You're making sushi. Are you making breakfast? Are you making a meal for children? Are you making a meal for your grandparents or your parents? And rice polishing machines are very prevalent in Japan, unless you're living near a farm where they're growing rice, where the co-op will polish it for you when you buy it from the rice store. And in about 1985, 86, I bought my first rice polishing machine. It's not a husking machine. It just takes the bran off, a small amount. But I've been eating 100%, I mean, 70% unpolished, 30% polished rice. Aveline Kushi was so angry with me when I published that article, and it created a lot of controversy because you couldn't easily go to Amazon in those days to find a polishing machine, which you can now for like $65. You can buy one on Amazon. Well, I don't know now. Maybe the tariffs, it'll go up, but it's something that is available. And so we were going to call this forum a paler shade of brown, which is really an encouragement, if you haven't tried it, to try. And we often mix sweet rice with regular short grain rice, each of them 30% polished, cooked together. It's delicious, it's digestible, it's still nourishing. We get fiber, we get nutrients, but hard to get all of your nutrients, all of your vitamins from rice bran, no matter if it's 100% polished or unpolished. But it's certainly more delicious to me, easier to digest, and a more commonly consumed food throughout the world. So whole wheat, also most of the bread that you buy that's whole wheat is only about 60 or 70% whole wheat. they mix unbleached white flour with it. You can make it yourself, but if you filter out some of the bran, you'll find it to be easier on your digestive system, more nutritious and delicious.
So Lenny, I still want to stay with your Boston experience because the East West Journal offices were basically right next door to the East West Foundation. So you got a close-up view of what was going on, who the teachers were, you interacted with them, you taught some at the East West Journal. So,
Kushi Institute.
sorry, Kushi Institute. So how did you perceive all of that?
We entertained Fiakushi last week.
Mhm.
Last week, he was visiting here from St. Louis, and we were talking a little bit about the evolution of the Kushi Institute from the East West Foundation and how the East West Foundation and Kushi Institute coexisted. We moved East West Journal to 17 Station Street in 1978, as far as my memory goes. And the Kushi Institute had already started there. And so, yeah, we were right across the hall from the Kushi Institute, which had two classrooms and a cooking school. And then their offices were there. And the East West Foundation ultimately kind of merged into the Kushi Foundation. And there were active classes going on all the time. And yeah, I was one of the original teachers of what we call level one Kushi Institute before it moved out to the country, out to Beckett. The classes were all taught there at 17 Station Street. And as I said, as macrobiotics became more well known in a positive light as a diet that could not only cure cancer, but could teach counselors how to help people who were suffering from serious diseases, how they could learn about the practices and methods of improving people's health. And again, when you and I started macrobiotics, it wasn't about curing incurable diseases. It was about helping us evolve our awareness about the world and developing a much more embracive view of the world and integrating yin and yang, integrating East and West, and personally developing skills that would help us navigate in ways that were otherwise very polarized. This became then the diet to prevent or to cure cancer. And a lot of rigidity about that. This is the right way, this is the wrong way. This is the binge food, this is the okay food. And it was frustrating. I would see counselors, people would come to a counselor, I don't want to say who, but the very well-respected dietary health counselors drinking coffee. And the person would say, well, is coffee okay on this diet? Are you drinking coffee? No, 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 no. That's grain coffee. No, no, that's grain coffee. We don't drink actual coffee bean coffee. That's too yin. Well, is smoking really okay? Smoking is fine as long as you eat enough miso soup and seaweed because it completely eliminates the tar and nicotine from your lungs, and you can see how healthy we are. There was a difficulty in really being honest, having an awareness that if we did need a cigarette, if we did need coffee, recognizing it's part of what we need as opposed to a binge or something wrong that we can't admit. And it's very frustrating to not allow honest expression of what's important in our diet or our lifestyle. There were people saying, I don't know what I can do. I just don't like rice anymore. I can't eat it. Well, maybe you shouldn't be eating it. But they felt guilty that they weren't adhering to the so-called gospel. But there was no gospel. The gospel was follow your intuition, use principles to direct your life in a liberated way, rather than feeling like we've got to follow this text, this prescription, this recipe. And it's hard to teach flexibility. Even yoga teachers have a hard time teaching flexibility, but flexibility in terms of choosing, is hamburger okay or is it bad? Is a milkshake okay? Or what about most of us in the 60s and early 70s had experienced a lot of psychedelic drugs, whether it was just marijuana or LSD. This was now eliminated from our diet, but it was like banned substances. It was like we had all been addicts and we denied our previous addictions. And maybe AA would have been a better thing for all of us to say, yeah, I'm a sugar addict. I try not to do it anymore. But instead, it would be a binge. And people did it. And because they didn't know how to balance and harmonize in their diet, they became addicted to whether it was sugar or alcohol or coffee or different types of things that, again, it kind of broke the standard. And I think the standards at the Kushi Institute, that that's where the standard macrobiotic diet came from. This is the right and this is the wrong. This is the way to cure cancer. This is the way to prevent cancer. And then you start seeing people with cancer or people who were angry all the time, or they couldn't manage money, or they couldn't attract a good team of talented associates working in their business. And I saw that at the Kushi Institute. They went through so many directors of the Kushi Institute. Haruo Kushi, who's Micho's second son, who has a Doctor of Science from the Harvard School of Public Health in nutrition, he was teaching then, and he was also a student when they decided to create certification for macrobiotic teachers. This was going to provide a certificate that would allow you to show to your patient, as though you had a college diploma in your office, that you are qualified to teach and counsel for health issues. And Haruo and I both resisted this idea that we could certify based on not creativity and imagination, not a new discovery, but on being able to repeat back to the testing body of macrobiotic senior teachers what they had been taught, that they really knew how much water to use when you're making hijiki, how much salt to use, and how much pressure do you use, a 5 or a 10 or a 15-pound pressure on the pressure cooker when you're going to make rice for someone who's 5 to 10 years old. I mean, like, give me a break. I mean, but that was the level of, I mean, I have a friend who failed because he used too much lemon in the salad dressing for a pressed salad. And he was a creative cook. He had imagination. He didn't want to do it. He wanted to be judged on his creativity, not on his rigidity, not on his memorization skills. And that was a part of the issue, that they held too tightly to these concepts, to these principles, to these practices.
Right. Just let me interject my own experience with that. I was totally against this certification. And Bill Terra was in charge of the East West Foundation at the time, and he said, do it and you can help change it. And it was really the reason I was against it, and I made this very clear, was that to me, the only thing that needs to be certified is counselors, because they have a huge impact on people's, because people let down their defenses in seeking guidance. And whereas if you're up there teaching to 100 people and you just start saying foolish things, people are going to question you and challenge you. But in a consultation, they've dropped those critical thinkings. And so I felt it was just counselors. Cooks could do whatever they wanted. Lecturers could do anything. That will help sharpen their understanding at best. But no, that was not the plan, and it totally failed.
But it is partly your question about what did I see in terms of the development of teaching, of counseling, of healthcare, of growth of macrobiotics I mean, it was an amazing time, really, for those of us who experienced it or who read about it. And I know that it was happening in Chico-san, in Oroville, and in Berkeley and San Francisco, and then in Los Angeles, there was an active East-West center, and in Europe, all over. When Michio first came, his second visit to Paris, there were over 1,000 people who attended his lecture in Paris. And this was like in 1983 or 82 or something like that. It was amazing. And there were centers, Amsterdam, Antwerp, Ghent, London, Dublin, uh, there were South
Portugal.
Africa, yeah, Lisbon, and and we thought something that was of incredible value that was growing. East West Journal, we discussed with a number of publishing companies internationally to license East West Journal so that there would be a French edition, a German edition, a Dutch edition. Unfortunately, the businesses couldn't manage something as cumbersome as that, or not cumbersome, but as involved as that. So it never really happened. But our circulation grew internationally. We had circulation in Europe, we had circulation in Japan, and we had 150,000. The only existing macrobiotic publication that is Macrobiotics Today, which is a great publication. Carl has done an amazing job. And just as evidence of the reach and the interest in the topic, he has 500 subscribers and it's free online. So it certainly has contracted. Not that contraction is bad, but it's not growing on the way that we had once thought and seen and experienced. And and what Michael was saying about, yes, certify health counseling, but don't certify rigid thinking in terms of your teaching, because a tenured professor at a university doesn't get tenure because he's repeating the texts that came before. They're tenured based on their creativity, their imagination. They're developing new ideas beyond what exists. And this is where we as humans, and human development is still our interest, we have not to worry about AI. AI cannot come up with new ideas. It can predict based on data from the past. It can make predictions about the future, but it can't create new ideas. It has no imagination, and we have imagination. And that's the opportunity as human beings to really grow beyond where we are. The other thing I wanted to say, just in terms of what I learned, that it's hard to say, any of us, I am a macrobiotic practitioner, or yes, I eat a macrobiotic diet, because that's a limiting description. It's a label that some people feel, kind of gives them security or stability. But in fact, it's based on its history, it's a limiting label rather than an expanding one. But if we say we practice macrobiotics, we practice a life that's based on principles, and the principles are universal principles. And Ganat herself said, discovering that there is an order to nature, that there is an order to the universe, that plants exhibit in their growth spiral movement. And some of that spiral movement actually follows the logarithmic spiral that can be described by the Fibonacci series. And we can actually see that nature is organized around principles, around theorems, around laws that we can understand and that we can use to adapt our own life to. It becomes really a liberating experience, because then we are not separate with our mind from nature, but we are integrating our life and our life practice, how we eat, how we sleep, how we go to the bathroom, how we cook our food, how we have our relationships, that we can apply these same principles in our life practice, so that it becomes not a diet, not a religion, but a practice that includes and embraces everything that we do: childcare, healthcare, uh, personal spiritual practices, how do we embrace and include all of these using the same kinds of principles that we apply in our choice of food? That's a really liberating opportunity that I find, a value from where we've been since, 1968. But Ganat, are there questions from our participants that
Th-
need to be addressed?
There are. Um, I'll run through them. Hang on, let me.
Or do you have some that you want to challenge me on? Because you like controversy and excitement. I've got a couple more, but go ahead.
Okay, so the first one is technical. Don't we understand that measles is a natural and welcome discharge? It's something that all humans get. So we don't discourage it, we bring it on, and with control, of course, as you
With,
said.
that's what I said was yes, I think it's part of our natural maturation process. And that we need, though, not to ignore the symptoms, but know how to treat the symptoms so they don't get out of hand. And that's what was sometimes missing in our rejection of modern medicine. We say, no, we're not going to do that, but we don't know what to do. If you get a broken bone, do you have to go to the doctor? Do you have to get an x-ray? What would you do? What would you do if your child, who's 4 years old, develops 103 fever and gets red spots?
Yeah, well,
What do you
that's
do?
different than breaking a bone. Yeah, I understand.
And so we
Okay.
need to learn and be responsible and not just rejecting. That's all, that's my point. And if we do know how to take care of, because you don't do vaccines doesn't mean you're not going to get sick. But like tetanus, my kids got cut several times during their time in school and they didn't have tetanus. And the teachers knew they didn't have tetanus. Tetanus is introduced through a puncture wound, and the bacteria that causes tetanus is anaerobic, which means it cannot live if it's exposed to oxygen. So if a cut or a wound bleeds, you cannot get tetanus. But if it's a puncture that doesn't bleed, you can get the bacteria can be introduced into the body, into the bloodstream, and you can get lockjaw, which is a terrible disease. But if it bleeds, there is no way. And so make it bleed.
Uh-huh.
Or if it's bleeding, no need to get a tetanus vaccine. But you need to know that because
Yeah.
if you're out in the field and you got a puncture wound, or your kid does, your child does, and it doesn't bleed, you could have a serious problem.
Okay, so you have to know, you just have to know these things. Next question, also mine. Do you think that the inflexibility is a trait of people attracted to macrobiotics and, comma, also a trait of Michio?
I think inflexibility and stubbornness and narrow-mindedness, or however we want to describe it, maybe not in such a negative way, is a human trait. And it's our fight and flight mechanism. We've learned certain behavioral patterns so that we have survived until this day, rejecting this and accepting that. If our life we've eaten hamburgers and we never got sick, or we never felt like bloated, or we never had indigestion, why would we ever want to give it up? On the other hand, if everything, we saw somebody eating an animal, we were repulsed, and we were able to live our life, very healthfully and happily without eating animal food, we wouldn't want to change. I don't think it's unique to, I mean, Jewish people are kosher, and if they break from that, they feel like they're not going to go to hell, but they are not going to live a full life. And so I believe that it's an opportunity to evolve past our inflexibility, and we need to be open-minded. So there is that mindset kind of book that, do we have an open mindset, a growth mindset, or a closed mindset? And educational systems basically teach this is right and that's wrong. This is how you get a good grade, and this is how you're going to pass, and this is how to get into college. And you better study and prepare your vocabulary, your math skills, whatever is needed.
Mhm.
Do it this way and not that way. How much is 1 + 1? We all think we know the answer. But here we are. The three of
Well,
us have created however many So 1 + 1 + 1, we've created whatever, 30, 40 people participating here.
Yeah.
So I would just like to add that I think part of this rigidity is out of fear. Fear of making a mistake, fear of self-harm, and that's a major blockage because fear stops us from connecting to our intuition, our basic sanity, and so we become locked in that fear, whether it's macrobiotic dictums of what's right and wrong, or Jewish law, or whatever, people get locked in. And so we need to dissolve our fears, feel new courage, and therefore we can tap into our intuition. We don't get to intuition when fear is there.
Yeah, and I think in terms of modern medicine and our fear of it among many macrobiotic people, results in serious illnesses that
Right.
could have been treated and were ignored because we were afraid of, we weren't afraid of taking LSD when we didn't know anything about it, but we were afraid to eat, an aspirin or swallow a Tylenol. It's crazy. I mean, but what's going to happen? I mean,
Right.
and what Osawa, at least the apocryphal stories were, when he would go visit somebody who he had never been at their house before, he would ask to go to the bathroom just so he could open the medicine cabinet and try out one of the pills in there that he had never tried before to see what would it do. He was an adventurer. He was, and Hiroshi Hayashi, he said, a human being should not be able to not be afraid to eat anything. As a human being, our omnivorous appetite should allow us to eat and enjoy everything and anything. Maybe we need to learn how to cook it better, how to present it more appealingly, but we should be able to enjoy and digest anything and everything as an evolved human being. No fear.
With the caveat that modern manufacturing of food has so corrupted that ability to just eat anything. I mean, the Dunkin' Donuts are just junk food, and we have that word, and they will cause consequences. But I agree with your point.
Yeah. Non-credo is challenging to live that way, not to just, well, Michio said, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Third question, also mine. Do you think that whatever brought down, or the process that brought down macrobiotics in the 80s when it started kind of falling apart and bankruptcy and all that kind of stuff, is the same, shall we say, relationship or for the state of international macrobiotics today? Or maybe it's a continuation. I don't know if that's a valid even question. In other words,
Well,
yeah.
again, let's not say brought down. Let's just say contracted. Because I think that we're judging, Erewhon's bankruptcy as a failure as opposed to a transformation. And maybe it allowed for the growth of Whole Foods, and maybe Whole Foods, I don't know, some of you have experienced Erewhon. Erewhon in Los Angeles, these stores are much closer to the image and the vision that the Kushis and other macrobiotic people who developed Erewhon in the 60s and 70s had for healthy food. And so it's the spiral, it's a wave, it's a transformation. In Europe, I think that we've discussed this. Martin Halsey, who we hope to have as a guest on this forum in July, he has a macrobiotic center in Italy, and he calls it the health center. He doesn't say macrobiotics, but he teaches macrobiotics. And he has hundreds of people involved in his studies, all online for a fee. And it's been growing over the last 5, 6 years, well beyond where it was 10, 12 years ago. And Bill Terra, he calls it macro vegan. Macro vegan is also growing because it appeals to the veganism, the vegan movement, as well as some of the people who were once macrobiotic, who felt that the environmental movement needed to be integrated with our dietary movement. And so it's been growing. It doesn't have the same level of business kind of branches, book publishing and magazine and so forth. But as far as an education center, as far as health treatments, and in Portugal as well as in Italy, you can graduate from a macrobiotic set of studies and be certified with a certificate that's recognized by the country's government. So as a certified macrobiotic teacher and counselor in Portugal or in Italy, you can actually, it's recognized that you can actually collect insurance payments for the person, or the person who goes can get paid by insurance, and they're not persecuted and challenged by the government, but they're supported by the government who feels that they're offering healthful health benefits that aren't as expensive as the modern allopathic medicine treatments and are just as effective. So, I think the opportunity to flex, the opportunity to evolve, the opportunity to use the principles rather than to be stuck with this is right and that's wrong. I'm only going to do it the way they taught me. I'm not going to evolve it. And that's the whole idea about creativity, imagination, and open mindset.
So final question then, not mine. Would you say that macrobiotics, the way it's developed now, is overly young, too young?
I think yin and yang is I mean, it's narrow and it's also weak. It's limited and
What,
it also, I'm sorry?
yin and yang, the concept is narrow?
No, the macrobiotics today
Uh-huh.
is both limited, but it also is, the germ of a potential growth. It's changed from the way it used to be, and it's have the opportunity for developing in a way that we imagined it could be. And I wanted to speak to that right now. I wanted to speak to connecting to the inspiration that we had in the 60s and 70s prior to the diet that can prevent cancer. The cancer prevention diet was incredibly popular, successful book, as was the recovery of cancer by Anthony Sadalero, Recalled by Life. But I don't think anybody would read those books now, considering how many macrobiotic long-term, short-term teachers died of cancer. We can't make those claims. All we can say is that there were miraculous recoveries of serious illnesses using something that was revolutionary in diet and lifestyle, and it's one of many things that have been very effective. But the inspiration that we had in the 60s and 70s, and maybe in the 80s, and maybe everybody here was inspired by the opportunity of a full, rich life that allowed us to really express our full potential as human beings. Right now, the 21st century is hardly the one peaceful world that was being envisioned by the long-term macrobiotic foundations and teaching centers. Unless we say peaceful world is a world where we can engage in warfare with everybody without any restraint, it's a very disappointing uh, period of our human history, considering that we not only invested ourselves in a cancer cure diet, but a lifestyle that and a practice that would help people connect on an intimate, trusting level, that would connect countries, that would connect governments, that would give us not necessarily a diet that everybody would follow, but a way of interconnecting and trusting. I mean, you're in Israel now. I mean, there have been ups and downs, but I can't imagine a time when there was more tension than there is now. Maybe when Moses came back from the Exodus, but this is a tough time. In the United States, it's developing potentially to be even worse. Hard to say who are the uprisers and who are the indigenous people and who are the intruders in the United States. But we are developing such a strong kind of polarization we had never anticipated, from the 60s and 70s to now. We thought we were developing a shared ground that we all were developing. People, anyhow, yesterday in the United States, there were probably 1,000 cities that had anywhere from 500 to 30,000 people gathering to say hands off. And hands off is kind of an ambiguous statement, but it was representing the dissatisfaction of maybe 400,000 people who went out publicly to express their upset about the way things are happening in the United States. And in the past 10 years, there have been two movements that have developed. One is called Move On, and the other one is called Indivisible. And those were the organizations that fostered these demonstrations yesterday. And I'm wondering, what's our role in terms of political statement, in terms of political movement, in terms of not necessarily taking sides, but Indivisible says we are one. We are not, there's not a right and wrong. There's not a Republican and Democrat, but there is a humanity. There is not necessarily a nation. It's United States and not Canada. It's North America and it's the planet Earth. And how do we, as fully functioning, healthy, vital human beings, engage with Indivisible, move on? What can we do that would help to unify this broken, fractured, fear-based world? Michael talked about fear that makes people stubborn and stuck. It's happening more now than ever. People are afraid of losing their health care. People are afraid of losing their citizenship. People are afraid of losing their job. People are afraid of being manipulated by some force outside of themselves. This is how we found macrobiotics in the first place. We wanted to liberate ourselves, and not for each of our personal benefit, but as a society, as a community, as a tribe, as a member of this human race. And it's not like indigenous people versus the immigrants. It's not like, the I don't want to, anyhow, I don't want to name other names. How could we, this was, anyhow, George, Herman, Micho, they survived World War II, and they recognized the challenges of living in a world where there were ideologies and nations fighting against nations. So the League of Nations, the United Nations, they were visions that came out of that World War conflict. What can we do now? What can we do? Not to come up with another slogan, one peaceful world, but what can we do providing food at these demonstrations? What can we do to provide health care at these demonstrations? What can we do to work with with these organizations, Indivisible? What do we want to do? What do we have the time and the energy to do? How can we, and I don't want to speak for Israel, but I know that in the United States, it's easy to take sides. It's easy to create polarization. It's easy to use social media to attack them and say that we're right. And one of the things, and I hesitated to bring this up, Ganat, but I'm going to anyhow. Ganat and Michael and Carl and Simon Brown and a number of us have been meeting for almost 2 years now. It was Michael's instigation initially to say, as macrobiotic teachers, students, practitioners for a long time, what do we share? What principles do we still hold to that we could discover among ourselves that could be the unifying principles for a world macrobiotic movement? And over the past 2 years, we've been meeting every 2 weeks. And there's somebody in England, there's somebody in Portugal, there's somebody in Czechoslovakia, there's somebody in California. Anyhow, we're all over the world. And we have we have put together a plan to complement what Gannat has been doing for the past 10 years with this whole health macrobiotic forum, calling it integral macrobiotics. And that we would like to continue these conversations and have them even more frequently, and to bring in people around a centralized principle of macrobiotic theorems, principles that we've all practiced and studied, not limited to diet, not limited to exercise, not limited to meditation or spiritual practices, not limited to politics, but embracing all of those factors in our daily life, and really try to rekindle, reinvigorate, reimagine who we are, what we can do, not only for our own personal health, but the health of the world. Do we have something that we have learned that we can use to guide and direct and support a unified, harmonized society? It's going to be challenging because there are people who want to say, my way is right and your way is wrong, and screw you. But we want to, with courage and with clarity and with discrimination, and we might say judgment, offer some guidelines, some support, some methods that could actually help unify these divergent groups and support a growth mindset, an open mindset, a unified society.
So we have 3 responses, and you guys let me know if you're done or we can continue. First response is mine. And it seems to me like these movements that you're talking about, indivisible and move on, to me, they feel like political statements. They feel like it feels like you're kind of not wanting to say the T word, and that we're talking about Trump policies and anti-Trump and this kind of thing. So I'm questioning about if we, being macrobiotic community, want to identify ourselves as pro that and anti the other. I'll give you the other 2 questions.
Well, indivisible doesn't necessarily sound, I mean, one nation under God, or one nation indivisible, forget it, under God. That was what the Pledge of Allegiance is. It's indivisible. It's not this and not that. Move on does sound more political. Indivisible, I thought, made it sound unified, harmonized, whole.
Well, that was my response to it.
Okay.
Number 2, we already have a volunteer who wants to join us at our newly expanded or developed out, however you're describing it, of the integral.
Integral macrobiotics.
Yeah. So we already have someone wanting to.
Just, email me, leonard.jacobs@gmail. Anybody who's interested in continuing this conversation.
Okay. Next one. Oh, and there's one more after. One is asking about how can macrobiotics be appealing to his children, for example, or how can we grab? And of course, we all knew that we wouldn't, but anyway, that was the question. How can
The
we?
question?
The question is, yeah.
Young children, adolescent, what?
No, I think they're adult children. Young people get confused. Only a few are attracted. For example, with his children, how would macrobiotic looks 30 years from now?
I think the only way you can really influence anybody is by example, and if we are healthy, active, vibrant, embracive humans, people are going to say, wow, what do you do? How do you maintain that life? How do you maintain that, way of life? And, well, here's one thing we do, we chew our food better. Somebody said, I think it was recently, that somebody couldn't give up hamburgers. And the counselor said, you don't have to give up hamburgers, just chew it better. Chew your hamburgers so well that it will, because they were getting indigestion, but they couldn't give up their hamburgers. They got better digestion. They just chewed better.
Yeah, that's nice, I think. That's
Yeah.
really
Yeah,
open.
don't give it up, just chew better.
Yeah.
Or, get fresher food. But an example.
Mika asks, when I was in Japan and asked why they ate polished rice, the answer I got, yes, we do eat polished rice, but we do use the brand Nuka in pickles.
Good point. Yep.
Mm.
And Lima, who lived to be 100, at 90, she couldn't digest whole brown rice anymore, and she ate white rice, even though until 90. So if you can get to 90, you can then give up brown rice altogether. But if you want to follow her, but anyhow, she was, grew up eating rice, and even
She had
she,
black hair almost to the end too.
yeah, she had
Because-
black hair almost to the end.
Yeah. Yeah.
But Nuka is a great one. If you can get a rice polisher, you can save that bran, and you can use Nuka in a cheesecloth bag. It's a great treatment for children or for adults in a bath or a shower to get the oil from that bran. And then you squeeze it, you make the bag wet, the cheesecloth bag, and you can rub it on your skin. And it's a really wonderful, nourishing oil for skin health.
So I wanted to ask Lenny a question. And the question starts with this.
Uh-oh.
This
Yay.
Macro Muse 1983. And Lenny wrote an article. And the article is called Diagnosing Macrobiotics.
Oh, gosh.
And it got a lot of response. And so my question to him now, this is 43 years later.
Wow.
43 years later.
Did I have hair then?
Probably. We're still diagnosing macrobiotics, and it's a good investigation and reflection on where it is, where it was, where it can be. But you raised a key question in this article, and the key question was, all right, we know the front of macrobiotics. What's the back? And you searched, your whole article is in search of an answer. What's the back to macrobiotics?
Mm.
Do you want to answer that question now?
Yeah, I think we know the front was the claims, the positive presentation about liberation, about integration, about evolution. The back is what we've been talking about also today, which was the failures, the sicknesses. And I think a lot of it had to do with that we were too young to understand that yin yang is not two. Micho asked me to teach level 1 macrobiotics, and I thought, oh, geez, why do I have to? Why am I the elementary school teacher? I want to be the graduate school teacher. I've been around a long time. He said, no, no, level 1 is the most important because that's where you really introduce yin yang uh, ideas and concepts and practices. I said, but I don't understand it. He said, oh, by teaching it, you'll get it better. And I think it's really getting older and seeing, two sides of one is really helping me. And I was a terrible teacher then because I didn't really grasp it. I could only teach salt is yang, sugar is yin, meat is yang, dairy is yin, whatever. That's just giving categories. And I think that the front was we have a lifestyle practice that's based on principles. The back is, do we really understand these principles well enough to present them in a way that harmonizes and integrates rather than fractionates? And we became, closed-minded. Brown rice is good, white rice is bad. Unpolished is better, polished is not good. Donuts are bad. I don't know, whole grain bread is good. And it's like food. Food is all together. There isn't, so the backside was, I think, our inability to understand. And the only way we could really understand it was experience and failing. And that was another part of it. We talked early in our macrobiotics days. I don't know if you and I had this conversation, but we once said, let's get together 10 years later, 20 years later, and discuss our failures, because those who failed the most tried the most and could potentially learn from what we failed. Taking responsibility for our failures is far more valuable, I think, than blaming others, blaming the T word, or blaming the society, or blaming the medical profession. Why did, I mean, I don't want to, be too critical, but Micho said the reason Erewhon went out of business is because they started selling Erewhon branded potato chips and Erewhon branded yogurt.
Mhm.
Those were not macrobiotic foods. That's what caused bankruptcy. What about a bad accountant or bad controls over their finances?
Mhm.
I mean, I don't want to go into it, but we'll have to take responsibility for where we fail and attempt enough that we fail enough that we can examine, why did I fail? Why did my marriage fail? Why did my business fail? What did I do? Not to live in guilt, but certainly to learn from the mistakes that we made so that we develop a better way of handling things in the future. And I think macrobiotics blamed the media, blamed the medical profession, blamed so many things.
Blame the patient who didn't get well.
Right, right.
Yes.
Yeah. Why didn't you get cured? Because you didn't follow my dietary recommendation, or you had too much oil. No, you didn't have enough oil. God. Anyhow, yeah. I don't know if that answers the question, but it is a good idea to figure out, as we diagnose others, as we diagnose society, how can we diagnose our own practice, and what can we learn from our diagnosis
Mhm.
to improve on it?
You said,
Uh-oh.
in answer to your question, um, we are furthering the arrogance we so much want to dissolve. We are creating exclusivity and elitism, and are ignoring much value in the world. We have to add the yin aspect of tolerance to criticism, and we need to develop a sense of understanding in addition to judgment.
Ooh, that's good.
Yeah,
I was smarter then. More articulate. Maybe I had a chance to write and rewrite. But yeah, I think that's a good point, is really understanding, listening,
Mhm.
and not just forming a judgment and saying, oh, this red nose means this, and therefore do that. But like really understand what led you to do whatever it is that caused the area that you're trying to correct. And that includes me. What are my root causes of my cravings, of my avoidances? And I think the other aspect to that is this area that we are, as humans, also bound by cravings and aversions. We can't give up what we want, and we can't give up what we dislike. And that aversions and cravings is this duality that is so common in our human life. And we hoped that macrobiotics would help us evolve from that. But I think it can. And that's where integral macrobiotics, hopefully integrating different psychological, spiritual practices along with dietary ones that are not limited to what our teachers taught, but are including what exists and is authentic based on hundreds, thousands of years of practice. Sylvia has her hand up.
Good. I'll just put in while she's lowering her hand. Christiane is saying that the backside for her is a separation from the rest of the world. So she sees it like that. And I think that's good. Sylvia.
So I want to start with saying that I do use 25% white polished rice to my 75% brown rice. And I want to point out that I have still a good deal of my brown hair coloring. And my recent labs, within the past year, my glomerular filtration rate, which is a measure of kidney function, has been as high as 119. It's currently 84, but this is extremely good for a woman who turns 80 this year. And the nurse practitioner that I work with every few months, she comes to my home. She says anything over 70, even in young people nowadays, is great. So I'm looking for a fact-based or verifiable macrobiotics. In the first lecture, which I did for Gnat Rice, I mentioned that we normalized my mother's very extremely horrific kidney and liver functions. We normalized them within 6 months. We got her chronic kidney disease stage 3, which I didn't know she had, but it was 38, and we got it up to 56 almost immediately, following not what most people are thinking of now as standard macrobiotic diet, but the traditional template. For instance, in terms of traditional people have a uric acid level between 3 and 4. I had mine tested approximately a year and a half ago. It was 4.1, which means I'm very close to an ethnic standard. Uric acid is one of the end products for the breakdown of purines and fructose. Fructose is in all our vegetables, all our fruits, and almost all of our desserts, unless we're sourcing our sweeteners from grain, with the exception of corn, which does contain fructose. On the topic of who should be certified, the idea of only certifying counselors or not certifying anyone, I'm thinking cooks are actually more important. They reach more people. They cost less money. People buy the takeout meals, which I did up until I started working outside the home in '96. I did it for a decade, bed and breakfast, takeout meals, cooking classes, cooking for workshops, etc. But I think that when I went to a meeting, a macrobiotic getaway at Gene Richardson's house in San Diego in 2014, I was just amazed. I didn't express it, but I was listening with, oh my God. One of the cooks told me that for everybody, she does her best to cook as yin as possible. And then at the same time, she's telling how her client is getting like one cancer after another and doing the medical treatment and then developing the next cancer. And it was just 4 days of just absolute fucking amazement. I could not believe what I was witnessing and hearing. On the topic of standard diet, the original diet taught, this is about digestion. The original diet taught 2 meals a day. Meal starts with miso, wakame, vegetable soup. The miso and the wakame are critical. They ensure that the saliva contains plenty of chloride. Chloride activates salivary amylase. So it starts the digestion of starch, complex carbohydrates, and chloride activates pancreatic amylase. So the end digestion of starch. And chloride is the dominant component of hydrochloric acid in the stomach for the digestion of fats, proteins, and complex carbs. And so when people are craving sugar, which traditional groups did not crave, like Japan had 8 different kinds of fruit in the country they were raising for thousands of years. They did not use them daily or weekly. They used them for party time. And Japan traditionally had 20 to 30 party days a year, when the rule was that the more labor-intensive vegetable side dishes, more of those were offered rather than one small portion of the vegetable side dish, thereby limiting the potassium and the fructose content of that diet. But anyway, so the digestion issue, we know that when people, chloride for digestion, but sodium for absorption, because it turns out that the active transport of glucose, almost every amino acid, almost every vitamin from the gut into the blood is sodium mediated. Sodium is the co-transport, the symport, the antiport, or whatever, to get it into the blood. These are facts. And so you can't digest and you can't absorb without sodium chloride, salt. And yeah, it's good if it's not refined because it contains 1% maybe of trace minerals that you need. But okay, as soon as you're craving sugar, means you're not getting enough salt, because sugar's the only thing you don't need to digest. Simple sugars don't require any digestion. People that are starving are put at great peace by sugar.
Sylvia, this is Michael. Let me just interrupt you now. I think you would be a great guest on Ganat's forum and talk about this, but it's not the place to keep going right now. We're coming to the end of Lenny's
Oh,
presentation.
I agree. And I was only responding to I wrote down digestion, sugar cravings, standard diet, cook's influence. If we are disseminating something, we want to be sure about what we're disseminating. We want to know it works. I love all of you, and I totally agree. I don't want to take away from Lenny's parade or the
Parade? I'm not parading, but I appreciate your point about cooking. I don't know anything about Gene Richardson's cooking school, and if there were a way to support, encourage, and guide people who are trying to cook healthy food, healthful food, food that would improve people's health, I think that's a good point. Whatever guidelines, principles that we can offer. I hope Christina Perello, I think she's offering a lot, and there are a lot of ways that we could improve our digestion, no doubt about it. And one of the points I think also in diagnosing macrobiotics is that, and this is not Sylvia, and I impressed with the quality of your health, your longevity in terms of continuing macrobiotics. A lot of people got a lot of benefit in changing their diet in the first year or two. And we had, as North Americans at least, grown up with a diet of excess, and reducing the range of extreme foods, fatty foods, cheese and butter and dairy and meat and eggs and poultry, we all felt so much lighter, energized. It was unfortunate, though, that we couldn't find the foods that took over when we started getting health of deficiencies like vitamin D, B12, and other nutritional deficiencies that, as they developed for us, for our children, for our parents, as we encouraged them to follow this diet, everyone except our children, maybe because they grew up eating this food, but we didn't know what to supplement, what to add, but as we started having issues of deficiencies. And so that is something that is another aspect of diagnosing the macrobiotic approach to diet. We knew how to eliminate, just sort of like a vegan knows what not to eat, but doesn't necessarily know what to eat to supplement or to supply all the nutrients that are essential for a healthy person.
But Lenny, also, your children were in a way would go out and want to eat these other foods and felt better from it. So they, in a way, were teaching the very thing that you're saying.
Exactly. It's a good point.
Yeah.
It's a good point because they grew up eating just these kind of limited foods. And as they encouraged us to make other foods, and so we tried to make it at home. And that's how I broadened my diet. That's how our family developed its kind of healthful approach to food, was we didn't say, oh, no, we can't have pizza. No, we can't have, I don't know, French fries, whatever it was that they really wanted. Or we didn't cook mammals at home, but we ended up eating poultry and fish and eggs and limited dairy, mainly fermented dairy. And it satisfied their cravings.
Right.
But thanks, Sylvia. We didn't mean to cut you off, as much as recognizing that you had some positive things to say, and that maybe there'll be a time in the not too distant future when you can talk about the specific metrics and diagnostics that you've used to evaluate your health, the health of your friends and family, and also recommend for others. It's fascinating, and we applaud your upcoming birthday. When is your birthday? You're on mute.
Yeah, I've muted her.
Oh, anyhow,
It's coming up in August. And I want to mention, and I put it in the chat also, that the sodium's the one thing that the body has savings accounts for. And we store it in our bones, in our skin, and in the interstitium. And that is now being thought of as another organ. And as long as we have this savings account, we can eat a sodium restricted, salt restricted diet and not know that it's salt restricted. And when we run out of it in older age, then we find out, oh my God, I wasn't eating enough salt. And we learn as we go. We can't learn things until we're ready to learn them. And so, yeah, I've learned definitely as I go, and I'm very impaired compared to where I would have been if I had known what I know now at the beginning, in which I didn't. Nobody can. And so we have to forgive ourselves for our slow rate of learning. But I want to point out, and yeah, this is an important point, that children born to parents practicing the salt restricted diet are born with essentially much lower savings accounts for sodium and run into trouble early on and need outside food early on. They will crave animal because right away you increase the salt in the diet with milk, for instance, or yogurt.
let's stay in touch, and we'll figure out a way for there to be some of your presentation in a future forum. That'd be great. Thank you.
I'm surprised. I'm encouraged.
Great.
The only thing that was off on my current blood work was the beta natriuretic peptide, which is a measure of heart function. And this is a long-term thing with me because my heart has been broken so many times that I tend to get into a very Jewish melancholy gloom on the topic of macrobiotics and what can happen with the sacrifice the teachers made and with our slow rate of learning as a community. But I'm just terribly excited that there may be a way out for all of us. So I love you. You.
Not any other questions, comments, suggestions, criticisms?
Yeah, we still have time. We have a few more minutes. Yes, this is mine. I'm thinking that when people or early macros in the beginning switch to macrobiotic eating, or when people who are on a standard American diet, so-called, and switch to macrobiotic eating, that they have good responses and they get themselves healthy and they feel very good. And then we're talking about after, I don't know how much time goes by, all of a sudden it kind of wears off. And people, macrobiotic people today who get ill, they don't have some amazing anything that they can do. So I'm wondering, or that I know of, so I'm wondering, what is the role psychologically of being able to hold on to this? This is going to do it. This is going to cure me. All I have to do is, and if they have a strong enough personality, they can chew and eliminate and whatever the whole thing is. Whereas current macros, what do they do? What do they have?
Michael wants to give some
Well,
insight.
it's a huge question and an important one. And the way I look at it is, there's an assumption in all of that, that everything is equal throughout life. And then bingo, something happens that we don't have any new resources, because macrobiotics is already the resource. And if it's not supporting us, then what? But what's going on is aging. There's a natural declining of innate power. And Oriental medicine is very exact how that diminishment occurs and where. And so I don't want to get too technical about that, but I would say that kidney energy is the source of all yin and yang forces in our body. And it's the time clock, women on 7-year cycles, men on 8-year cycles. It sets that time clock throughout our life, and it is already clocking out where the end will be. And that macrobiotics is not about
Immortality,
survival.
immortality, yeah.
Right. It's not about surviving or immortality. It's about thriving and gaining wisdom in our life. So there's only so many remedies that there are that any culture has come up with. And
Yeah, when I was working after our East West Journal, I went to work at a book publishing company, Shambhala Publications, and one of our authors, somebody that seems to really embody the teachings that she presented, and her books were based on her teachings. That's Pema Chodron, and Pema Chodron's most recent book is "How We Live is How We Die," and it's a really, it could just as well be our macrobiotic approach, and it's again. We can't have yang without yin. We can't have life without death. We can't have energy without sleep. We can't have food without having an empty stomach. We can't have life without death. How we live is how we die. And it's a very appropriate book for exactly this topic. She doesn't talk about diet, but she talks about our approach to our daily life and what do we do to embrace, to include, to enjoy, to recognizing our fears and not deny them, to recognize our anxieties and not deny them, to embrace yin and yang, to embrace happiness and sadness. Start where you are is one of her first books. And that's again, not start where you hope to be, but start where you are, accepting who you are, accepting who we are, a human being, mortal human being with loves and dislikes, with energy and frailty, with a wonderful full life that we have achieved our potential, and that our next reincarnation, if we believe that, will exhibit what we have learned from this incarnation or failed to learn from this incarnation. How we choose our parents, how we choose our awareness, is how we're choosing our daily life right now. How we live is our choice we can make. And, whether it's with an avoidance of dietary restrictions or a very strict dietary approach, how we live is, how we embrace the unknown, how we encourage change, how we allow for an open mind, or the alternative.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. That's very encouraging. So if we don't have any more questions, we've gone for just about 2 hours. You guys are beyond amazing. I really look for an orator as see how good I am. No, you're excellent. I really appreciate it very, very much. Michael, thank you for joining us as well.
Thank you.
Next month,
Next, we're going to interview you.
that's coming up.
Yeah, the two of us will interview Ganat, and we'll hear her personal insights, discoveries, and stories.
Next month, we hope to have Marlene and Bill Tara.
Oh yeah, Marlene and Bill.
Yeah.
May
So-
May 4th or 6th, whatever the Sunday is in May.
4th, yeah. So that will be really an interesting conversation. We'll be getting emails, newsletters about that. Again, fellas, I really, really, from my heart, I'm so grateful and appreciative and encouraged by all that you've said. Thank you 100 times. Yeah.
Can we continue our conversation, or we use WhatsApp, or how do we?
Yeah. We're
Okay.
gonna have a chat together.
Because there are other people are going to continue on the forum, or
Until I shut it down, yeah.
okay.
Yeah. Actually, I think that's about to happen. So everybody, thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank
How
you.
can we be in touch going forward?
How can we be in touch going forward?
With Michael and Leonard, I would like to continue this conversation with you. I'm working at the global level with Yin and Yang and bringing all this. I was with Michio at the UN in Bangkok in 1999, and that opened the world to me, the one peaceful world dream. And so I'd love to continue this conversation with you.
Yeah, leonard.jacobs@gmail.com.
Thank you.
Great then.
Thanks, Ganat.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure and an honor. Adios. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Shalom.
The angel. You say there's peace, peace, let there be peace. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hi, guys.